the DC special education space. The DCASE, the DC Association of Special Ed, works specifically with all the non-public special education schools in our area that serve DC students. So the Ivy Mounts, the Catherine Thomas, the Lab, Chelsea, I'll see if I can get everybody, Kennedy Krieger, Frost Schools at Adventist Health. I'm missing Chelsea School. I'm missing a bunch, but I'll bring them up. So we advocate specifically for them with OSSI on special education issues, and kind of everything from transportation to whatnot. This has been an unbelievable month. We have watched I'm telling you, some of these schools jumped on it so fast, my head was spinning. Some others have taken their time and they're getting ramped up. So we've had a lot of lessons learned on how to go virtual. There's also a lot of groups, and if you guys don't know about them, I'm happy to tell you what I know about them. So I want to make sure that this is something that's helpful to you and not repetitive, but there's a couple of national organizations that have kind of joined forces to create some websites about resources, and specifically for students with disabilities. There's one of our schools, Catherine Thomas School, has the Treatment and Learning Center, and they have put together a really great website with resources on everything. And I'm happy to, if we want to do a share screen, I think I can do that. I can show you, where those are. But I guess the question is, what are you all, what are you wondering? I can also talk to you about how OSSI has struggled with special education policy and where things stand with it right now. They literally have uploaded 2 new guidance documents, one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. So they are a fast-moving target when it comes to special education guidance and what things are going on. And I even have some information on where things are right now on graduation requirements for students, although that's for all students, not just students with disabilities. So I guess Christina, or everybody, like, do you have some specific questions, or do you want to talk about anything that I've mentioned?
I know on the collaboratives end specifically, I put out a survey to our teachers about what kinds of distance learning resources would they find to be the most useful. And I would say overwhelmingly, the #1 requested resource, aside from like a live learning lesson and study guides, was some kind of resources for special education or students in special education. And, I was doing a lot of research and I was pretty lost. It was really hard for me to find specifically distance learning materials and techniques to transfer over into these classrooms. And so I feel like that's a lot of where the conversation kind of was birthed. I think for this group, and I don't want to speak for anyone, definitely jump in, anyone who has their own concerns, but I think this group seems to be mainly comprised of a lot of members and teaching artists, so the organizations who are putting together the materials. So I think, just pointing us maybe in the right direction of what kind of resources, what kind of techniques, what kinds of materials are going to be useful during this time. And if you could point us to, any resources and knowledge that you have, that would be very useful as well, talking about the issues that these students already face in the district, maybe providing context as to what they're up against now with distance learning being added on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sending 2 links. Sorry, Diane, I accidentally sent it to you as a private message, but I've sent out 2. Let me tell you about Educating All Learners. It's a new national collaboration. DCASE is one of the partners. We have a whole bunch of folks on there from everything from NCSICS, which is the National Center for Special Education and Charter Schools, to the National Center for Learning Disability, Understood, a whole bunch of national groups, and they are putting together a pretty nice website. You can go right there and look at their resource library. They're adding resources practically every minute, but they're doing a nice job curating them, I think. They're doing things that are really specific for teachers. So they're not, I'm sure all of you have received, and I as a parent have too, like the emails that say, here's resources you can look at, and it's like 500 links all kind of smashed together. These are being a little bit more curated and doing some success stories and things. In fact, I'm going to work with them about doing a success story at Catherine Thomas and the Chelsea School, who've both been doing some nice things with teletherapy and social work teletherapy, social skills groups teletherapy as well. So keep an eye on that. I would tag that and kind of go through. You can also do a topic. So you're like, hey, I'm looking for something that's for autism students, high school, and know that they're kind of adding it as it goes. The second one I threw in there is from the local, the Treatment and Learning Center, and they run the Catherine Thomas School, but they also have the Treatment and Learning Center as kind of the umbrella organization. And I think they've done a pretty nice job of collecting, and in fact, let me just kind of pull it up. They've got the online resource that has reading, science, social skills. They've got a nice, and it's well done on the website, so you can kind of noodle around a lot, but online resources for museums, zoos, and aquariums. So if you're looking with some notes, they've got a nice list that say list of museums to visit online. They've got the link, they've got it for all grades. And then they say, links work, but you need to navigate through each museum website. So they've done a nice job, I think, of kind of giving you a little bit of something to go on. And those are two that I really recommend right now, because I just feel if you're going elsewhere, it gets a little too much. There's a couple of other websites that are a little bit more geared towards policy, like, and I think I'd have to pull it up because somebody sent it to me, but how each state is handling teletherapy laws, just to give you the nuances of how we've had to recreate like a lifetime of policy in the last couple of days. Let's, for instance, say we have DC students that go to school in Maryland at a special education school. Well, those Maryland schools have licensed social workers and speech therapists and OTs, and they're likely licensed in Maryland because that's where the school is and that's where they're giving. For them to do social work or occupational therapy to a student who's actually residing in DC during the time of a that was not allowed under licensure. So we had to get DC Health, and I shouldn't say we, they were smart enough to get this done, DC Health to put out a guidance document saying that will be okay. If you're licensed in one of the surrounding areas, you can practice basically because you're kind of practicing in DC. Note that if there is a complaint, we will investigate you, but you could do that. And so that's just one little cog that had to be kind of fixed. Also, you should know, and maybe you all do, but I just feel like I'm dealing with a lot of myths from school systems and different folks saying, well, we can't do teletherapy because it's against HIPAA, privacy guidance, or FERPA. Both, and I have those documents. I'm happy to, maybe Christine or Joanna let me know. I can send you, like I have a nice compilation of the PDFs or the links. But basically HIPAA and FERPA restrictions have been lessened to allow for therapists to use Zoom platform, some of these platforms are a little less maybe secure to be able to do this. Now, I also have some nice pieces if your schools or your groups need them, being put together by the Parents Place of Maryland, which is the Parent Training and Information Center for Maryland when it comes to special education and disabilities, as well as our local DC Advocates for Justice and Education. Parents Place, and AJE is building them up as well, but Parents Place has put together some really nice tools for parents of like how to make your, well, hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'm getting an internet connection unstable.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. They have put together some nice pieces for parents of how to be ready for a Zoom classroom, what you should do for a Zoom therapy session. It's a little nuances, even like, a parent needs to be in the home when a therapy session is going on, but they shouldn't be in the room. So literally when the social work happens with one of my children, I kind of wave at the screen at the start, and then I say, I'm going to close the door now, and she's going to be their privacy. So just little things maybe not everybody thinks about because we're in this whole new world. And I'm happy to send those. I think there's also some nice pieces coming out for guiding parents on how to do Google Classroom. Many of these things are not kind of intuitive if you haven't used some of those. So it's a lot of like, as the old adage says, building the plane while we're flying it. I will say in the originally, gosh, now what, Philadelphia was notorious for this, and a couple others saying, well, we're just not going to do any distance learning because God knows how we're going to do it for kids with special ed. The US Department of Education came out and said, no, that's not what we meant. We really want you to try to serve all your students with remote learning. So we're getting a little bit more to do this. I'm really trying to encourage people. There's a gazillion ways that this could get messed up, but at the same time, we know all of our students, I think, but especially our special ed students, are going to have regression. There's just no way they're not going to be academically behind, or social emotionally behind. We just know that. But if it's kind of the adage of let's try to do something, and here's some times where we can maybe be creative with some of these virtual pieces. So I would just encourage, if you're working with schools or you're having some pushback of like, oh, let's not do anything we're going to get in trouble with. I think now is the time where, yes, there may be some bad players out there, but I do think now is the time that this is where we can get maybe creative. I will say with some of my kids, one of my daughters with autism, I think she misses school, but it's hard to be social anyway. So having it on the screens almost, I think in some ways for her a little nicer. I was on a call last night with, on special ed in Montgomery County. And there were some parents saying, what happens if we actually like the distance learning better than real school? Oh, I may have lost you guys. My screen.
No, you didn't.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
No, we can still hear you. So
okay.
You're saying there's some parents that prefer distance learning.
Well, it was interesting in the chat of this Zoom call, there were parents that were saying, for kids who have like severe anxieties, some ADHD, some, different things, sometimes like the ability to just be doing screen work can almost be preferable. So, it's just an aside, but I think the important piece is this could very much go on longer than we first expected. I think many of us are also expecting that this could happen again, if we start to see the pandemic maybe come back in the fall, or, numbers rise, would they close schools for another period of time? There's I will tell you, a lot of advocates are asking, do we automatically do eligibility extension for our students? Do we do, some kind of ESY open for all students, or at least all students with, special ed? So there's a lot of whatabouts and whatabouts and whatabouts. So I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I want to make sure
there's a question there's a question in the chat from Joanna. And Joanna, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but I know a couple of weeks ago you brought up this point about students that have dedicated aides and how it's a federal mandate. So what happens now? Do you know of any stories of dedicated aides successfully using Zoom chat, or what's that going to look like? Are there possible legal ramifications in the time of distance learning?
Yes, I think there's always going to be possible legal ramifications. I think that, like anything else, if your intentions are good and we're trying to do this well, it's better. I will say that we've got to make sure parents don't think that an aide is coming to their home. That is not going to happen. Although I've heard that, a couple of times. I do think you can use dedicated aides and teaching assistants in a Google Classroom setting. You can also do it with Zoom. I saw really successful, I wasn't supposed to be listening, but I was, a very successful session going on with internships the other day, where they broke into Zoom rooms, because I think, you can have a big Zoom and then you can say, let's put these people in this room and this room. And that was the time when the dedicated aide went into a one-on-one room with the student. Now, is it really challenging if, we're talking low incident disabilities, like nonverbal autism, and you're trying to do attending? Absolutely. Is it going to require a parent or a guardian or an adult in the house to do a lot of supports? Likely. And I think, this is where I say, with educators and parents, sometimes less is more. If we can make this a really finite lesson and do a do a nugget of it and get some success, I think that's well. But you can use that virtual technology with that one-to-one time. I've also seen some setting up of one-to-one, teletherapy, but also one-to-one office hours. So having the classroom in the Zoom or getting together, and then the students allowing, setting up a time to meet with their teacher one-on-one and doing a Zoom lesson. It's really powerful when you can share the screen and the teacher's doing an algebraic formula, and then the student can, they're on a Google Sheet and kind of say, this is what I'm thinking. So it can work, but it's gonna, I think the key is it's not gonna look anything like it did, 5 weeks ago.
Good morning. This is Mr. Robinson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm a special education teacher. And I can say a lot of what you're saying is on point. I am differentiating the instruction online. And I have one-on-one sessions. I have students that are in inclusion. So I'm joining the teacher through Microsoft Teams. I've been on a call now. I know that I'm supposed to work a certain amount of hours, but I've had parents that call me at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I still take their calls. And I would like to see, if possible, some virtual field trips because a lot of my students are visual learners. And I know, like, through DC Collaborative and through the work I've done with Miss Clarissa, hi Clarissa, she has helped me expose my children to things that they wouldn't necessarily get exposure to. So I would love to see, like, at some point, like videos that my students can watch, like more of like a field trip style of a video. If I'm trying to articulate it in the best way possible. But
and do you guys have access with Ashley Grady from Smithsonian? Yes, okay, because she's done a lot of I've seen, and I haven't looked at them, so I don't know if they're of the level that you want, but she has done some of the Smithsonian and the museum virtual field trip links that she's been sending out. I think I'm getting it, Diane, maybe, are we once a week, I feel like, an email with data stuff?
Yeah, I was going to chime in here. So hi, everyone. My name's Diane Denning. I'm an accessibility and inclusion consultant, and I work a lot with cultural arts institutions and also arts programs. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
To be like a giant tree being removed outside of my house. So, there is a lot, and I think a lot of the cultural arts institutions are like rushing to get digital content online, and now there's a conversation between those of us who work in the access world of cultural arts saying, okay, wait, but we need to make sure this is accessible to everyone. So even basic things like captioning, audio description, ASL interpreting. And I actually am working with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival right now, and we are starting to launch. We have pivoted to sort of a digital platform, and we just did a test yesterday and put captioning in, which was amazing. And we have kinks to work out, but we're trying it. I actually did talk to Ashley last week, and she is trying to think about how to create programming, keep those connections going. As Mr. Robinson pointed out, so much of what a lot of the students we're talking about need is that hands-on tactile learning. So we're trying to think about, like, how do we take that and sort of replicate it? And there's a couple things, because I mean, one thing I'll just share that Ashley said is that, and Molly, touched on this, that for someone who, for example, is dealing with a sensory overload, if I'm overloaded, I close my laptop and I walk into the kitchen, right? So it is a little bit of a live experience, but it's that wraparound experience we need to think about. So it's, how do we provide, the equivalent of pre-visit and prep materials, which of course is extra work, I recognize, but how are we putting together PDFs of schedules and things like that? And Ashley is trying to think carefully about how to create those experiences that address those issues of generalization and all those imagination, all those things that some of our students can struggle with. I'm now talking specifically around neurodiversity as opposed to a sensory disability like deafness or blindness. But I know Ashley is working to do this. I know that a lot of a lot of arts organizations are putting content up, and I can tell you that the accessibility crew is sort of in the back row going, hello, don't forget to make it accessible. So I think that's the step we're working on now, which is ironically, that's sort of how it's worked in the live arts too, right? That, you know, everything's out there and it's like, oh, wait, yeah. So I think it's, I think it's coming. I think a lot of people, but I think you can also, you can work with arts organizations maybe one-on-one and say, this is what my kids need. Can we create some sort of, you know, specialized experience? There are a lot of arts orgs that have some stuff up, which is great. And I actually put in about arts learning, the Council for Exceptional Children, DARTS, which stands for something arts, something teaching. But they have a great Facebook group that has like incredible resources and files and connections. So that's something else too.
I just want to know, I put into the chat a whole bunch of things that Ashley just sent out, just so you have the resources there. Somebody asked what department she in, and I added, she is in Access Smithsonian, and I put her email address, and I'm sure, you know, she's terrific to work with. She used to work at Ivy Mount, so she's really in tune with the special education population. And you know, I sign up for her stuff because she, you know, is pretty good about curating and kind of pulling those things together. What else? What other questions or comments or?
I have a question that I'm posing to the group. You know, I remember in our last conversation, there were a couple of teachers who are arts teachers primarily, but of course, because they kind of serve the whole school population, they serve such a diverse student body. And so there were some arts teachers who were struggling specifically with trying to serve their students with special needs in this time. So I don't know if Mr. Robinson or anyone else wants to speak up. Like, do you have any best tips, best practices, any advice for teachers who don't normally specialize in this population, but are trying to figure out a way to best serve them in this time?
For me, collaboration is key. I work with service providers now that special education is not their expertise. And so we kind of talk through what students need to accomplish. Following the IEP is important because it's a legal contract. So for me, with the online platform, I looked at the IEP goals and tailored the instruction that way. What I ended up having to do is small group instruction to one-on-one instruction, and then, you know, going into the general education classroom that is on Microsoft Teams and supporting students. So I was just having a conversation with the music teacher at our school because she was trying to do some activities with the kids. And even though a lot of my students benefit from tactile support, we was able to try to figure out, okay, maybe we can find a video that will explain to the students, you know, what a music key is, because she was kind of stuck and didn't know what to do. And so she called me up and we just kind of troubleshoot. And then we were able to do a Microsoft Team lesson with the kids that she joined on. And it was very successful because of the collaboration. So I would say, you know, working with people, because there's no I in team. So I know that, and I explained this to my general ed teacher colleagues, you know, we all aim for the core, and how we get there is different, but we're aiming for the same thing. And so each of us bring our strengths to the table. I know a lot of the general ed teachers, their concern was making sure that we were still following the IEP plans that we had in place and the additional supports that were in place for students. I know I wouldn't recommend this to a lot of people, but I also did some pop-ups with families from a safe distance, checking in on kids as well. There were some kids that, there was a technology gap as well, because you had some children that didn't have access to any type of device. And so the school system, I feel like DCPS did a great job when it came to distance learning, because you hear about other school districts surrounding us that are having all this trouble with Blackboard, and kids still haven't even started distant learning. I've been in distance learning since March, since that week that we had off. That following week we were on, and all the kids were contacted during that week, and we figured out how to work the schedule, and we've made changes along the way to support each of the students. I know in my caseload I have 15, which is high. I'm at the max. However, I feel like serving the kids is my top priority, and figuring out how to do that, it was done through collaboration. So the inner core teachers at our school was also involved in the conversation, because a lot of my students need support during the inner core time, whether it's art, music, PE. And so we figured out ways where they can do lessons on Microsoft Teams. And then DC Collaborative had a Google Doc that had a lot of resources that I was able to use. And I actually shared some of those resources with my families. There was a particular video that the Smithsonian did with natural history. And I have a student that's autistic, student with autism, I should say, rather. And he enjoyed the video. He was obsessed over the video. And so his mom called me and said, "You got more? You better send more," because, you know, I saw him on a video, and he said, "Mr. Robinson, the video, I was like, okay, whoa. He was really excited. He told me everything that happened in that video. And so, you know, I appreciate like the partnerships, because it helps me support the kids better, because I'm not an expert in everything. You know, I'm just the expert in ensuring that the kids get the modifications and accommodations and differentiating the instruction so they have access to the general ed curriculum. Because many of my kids are significantly behind. And so my job as a special ed teacher, I have to provide them access to the general ed curriculum. So I'm modifying it. Even though in DC and most school districts, there isn't a special ed curriculum, how I do my instruction is following the IEP and making sure that through all of that, they have exposure. So with partnering up with, you know, DC Collaborative and, you know, the different art service providers that we have done field trips with, it has helped a lot with getting that exposure, because I'm not able to provide certain things to the kids because of the lack of resources that we have. So, you know, I really appreciate what you guys do, because, I mean, for the last couple of years I've been in DCPS, it has been great having partners through DC Collaborative to try to get the kids what they need that I cannot provide, you know, by just talking to them. You know, they need a whole lot of visuals. I remember the field trip we went to at the Natural History Museum. I had several kids that finally understood what I was teaching them for an entire month. By just seeing it and playing with the rocks, they understood and they started answering questions correctly. And I was looking at my other colleague, and she said, "These field trips are important." Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that we have these opportunities. And so when the kids came back, the principal, you know, had asked them how the field trip was going. Several of my kids was talking about things that I've been talking to them about, but it seemed like they didn't get it until they got there in person and saw it in, sure, you know, live in action. So,
like learners, they are.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I really, again, I appreciate what you guys bring to the table to support the work that I do, because a lot of my students, they have a lot of challenges. I have students that come from Ward 7 and Ward 8, and my school is in Ward 6. And, you know, with the DC lottery, you know, it's pretty much open. So, you know, like this year, I was sharing with my principal just before I got on this call, we had a staff meeting, then we had a SPED meeting. They were saying me and another teacher had a hard caseload. And oftentimes there's 3 teachers in the SPED department that have like the toughest cases, because we have kids that are so behind. And so when DC Collaborative have all these opportunities that are aligned with the curriculum, we always jump on it, and hopefully we're selected for these opportunities. But he was saying like the collaboration is so important, because I had a student that came to me in the 4th grade that was in the kindergarten level, and that is significantly behind. And then I had a 3rd grader that was at the pre-K level. And so he was sharing up to MOY, the middle of the school year data, that my kids were making progress because of the collaboration. So, you know, and I credit, you know, a lot of this growth through the opportunities I had through DC Collaborative with taking the kids on the field trips. And I do miss that, even though safety is important and making sure that the kids don't catch COVID-19. You know, I was hoping at some point there's like a middle ground with trying to expose the kids to more opportunities, even though it may be online, like a virtual field trip, like I was saying earlier. I'm really hoping that, you know, that happens down the road more often, because I know kids like me, you know, in my class, Mrs. McCann's class, Mr. Carter's class, Mrs. Roner's class, the kids benefit from that stuff. So I didn't mean to go, I don't usually talk this much, but I was excited to join in and to express my thanks and express, my appreciation for all of you by doing this, because just hearing you guys talk, it helps me as an educator. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
For sure. And thank you, Wesley. Wesley and I work very closely together.
We do.
I just wanted to give a shout out. Wesley is so great. He takes his students on, I feel like, as many field trips as possible.
Yes.
I really don't even know how many field trips he went on through us at this year, probably over 15.
Yes.
And he advocates not only for his class, but for different grade levels. And you're just such a champion at exposing your students to these opportunities. And you're really good at taking advantage of everything that we have to offer. So it's nice to actually see you in person, in flesh, kind of. But yeah, definitely appreciate your insight, and I think it'll be really helpful to take back to some of our specials teachers, or some other teachers whose specialty isn't special education, but have to figure out and navigate and have to pivot in terms of how to serve their students. I think there were a couple of questions going on in the chat that I didn't get to keep up with, but does anyone else have a question they want to pose to the group? I know there were some other talks about virtual field trip opportunities. And I think there was a question about teaching artists doing like a Zoom performance.
I had a question for geared toward parents, or actually training parents. So it's actually for Molly and for Mr. Robinson too, because I can imagine, it's actually an opportunity for parents or guardians to learn a few tactics, techniques that will help their students learn, because it's very hard for you, I think, to reach students on a daily basis. Do you know of resources for parents, other than kind of one-to-one, where parents can learn some of these tactics to help with what you're doing, especially when you get to the summer? I think they'll want to continue some of those things if they can.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard when I started, Parents
Right,
Place
yeah.
Maryland has put a lot of resources that are very parent directed. After I talk, I'll see if I can find it and put it on the link. But they have a really, and they also have it in Spanish. They almost always have everything in Spanish. They have some nice resources on how a parent's guide to Zoom, a parent's guide to setting up for Zoom, a parent's guide to Google Classroom. They've also talked about how a parent, monitoring the IEP, or thinking about, kind of just the intricacies of dealing with an IEP with distance learning and stuff. And I know that I talked to the folks at AJE, which is the DC Parent Training Center, and I know they're going to be doing a session, kind of an online, either Facebook Live or something else, but they'll record it. Again, also kind of train parents, even in progress monitoring. I know we didn't get into the details, but one of the things that parents are going to need to do is kind of, where are the goals and how are the students progressing, and how to take data on that, even if it's just on a certain way. I think if you're looking for specific guidance on how a parent supports a student, I'd always have to say that they're going to need to talk to the teacher, because it's hard to do anything generic, because my two kids with autism look different from Mr. Mr. Robinson. I was going to say Mr. Wilson, Mr. Robinson from Wilson, some of his students. So it's really got to be specific to the parent and the teacher. I was talking to one parent who has two younger sons with autism, goes to DCPS schools, I think 7 and 8 maybe. And it took them a long time to figure out how to do the ABA therapy. And it was finally, she was like, we put the laptop on the floor with him and gave him some squeezy toys because it wasn't working at the table. And he needed to be down on his level and work. And then the therapy went well. So it's a lot of trial and error, because, who would have thought, like, oh, the table's not good, they want to be on the floor and rolling around. Mine want to be at a table and having some, vestibular support. So I would definitely, I think the big keys is there needs to be some either special ed coordinator and or related service folks talking to the parent and saying, how can we set this up? And there's got to be flexibility, that it's not always going to be like, well, we want to do it at 9 o'clock. And, you know, if mom or dad or whoever's home is also doing webinars at the time and they're like, I just can't, you know, do this,
Right.
or, you know, not being there. So I think that's the piece that I would also say is it's got to be, and Mr. Robinson is right, it's complicated, and I feel for teachers and therapists right now is it's probably not all going to fit into a 9 to 5, 9 to 4, you know, whatever schedule. But I think the good news is once you get a couple trials and errors and you figure out it's on the floor, it's at 9 o'clock, the parent's going to give a warning symbol, you know, with a, you know, drum beat or a music at, you know, 8:55, and then we're going to sign on. You can get some, you know, good systems going first. It's all, our kids crave a schedule. And them knowing what time it is and what their schedule is makes a big difference. And I'm one of those parents that, you know, certainly when you see on FaceTime all the color-coded, you know, homeschool stuff, that's not me. But
Mhm.
even if it's a scribble paper and a Post-it note next to the computer for this child, like 9:15, then you get a break, then you get to do this. It really does make a difference with the schedule and outside time. And I just have to share with you my favorite joke is I saw it on a parent blog today, and it said, I wonder when the kids find out who their teachers are next year. I sure hope it's not me. Because
Yeah, but it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I wanted to well, first of all, thank you, Molly. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I'm a teacher, and my school is inclusion, but we have just, I teach music and performing arts, so I am not those teachers that do have training to work with children with special needs. And a lot of my students come without aids, and very often I'm alone in the classroom with a full class with no other support. So it's always a learning experience, and I love challenging myself to see what I'm going to find. But just tagging along on what you've said, and again, Kent, I think that conversation is so important, and we did touch that last time that Clarissa led this conversation, that the parent piece is such a crucial piece. But also what you said, Molly, that once you figure out what works for the children, so they are learned lessons there. Mm-hmm. So I would like us just to think a little bit, this is what it is, this is the new norm, and I think that we know a lot of the negatives and the downsides. There are other things, I think, that may shine some light and some positive gain, even as small as it is, as a whole, collectively, right? Because special needs is such a wide range. But you've also mentioned the children that I teach, so many of them, I see anxiety is a very big issue. And you mentioned at the beginning that for the children that are very anxious, this setting is actually not a very bad setting for them. And in some ways, if their parents are occupied with their own work and other siblings are busy, and they are somewhat left to their own, they self-direct sometimes their need and where they need to be. Of course, I'm generalizing, but there are advantages there too. And I wonder if we should be exploring a little bit more of those and pointing them out to parents or to whomever those children are with at home. Just the awareness of it, I find it serves as support. Sorry, I was long-winded. I couldn't summarize my thoughts.
Oh, and I think it's a double-edged sword. I think right now in a crisis time, it's okay. I've also said to parents, like, you know, education is important, but feeding your kids and mental health and a mental happiness, whatever happiness is anymore, is important too. And if you can't get them, you know, up in the morning to do the classes and stuff, give yourself a break and give them a break, and, you know, try again next day. I mean, isn't that the lesson of special ed? Well, we're going to try again the next day. And I think that's important. I think right now, I'll say in my own household, there's some happiness factor because they can manage with this. Now, I'm also, because I'm a special ed advocate, I'm also very aware that there's going to be regression on social emotional learning. So the anxiety maybe for my kids is a little less because they're in this bubble of, you know, not having to navigate the classroom, the high school hallways, and, you know, getting through lunch, that they don't like to be talking to other people and all of those. But, you know, they go to school because they also need to learn those things and get those strategies. So I think one of the things I think about is like, let's get through this. This is the hard part. This is really awful. This is the big scary for all of us, and get through it the best you can. But we do know going to school, I mean, you know, it's least restrictive environment, you know, the basics of special ed. We know that being with other people in a normal circumstance is very healthy for growth for our students, but it's hard. I've often said to people, to try to describe what autism looks like, you know, my kids get off the bus and I don't really talk to them. They don't talk to me. They go to their room and they veg, because it's like, imagine if you hate reading, or I hate doing taxes. You know, if I had to do taxes all day, how would I feel at 5 o'clock? Like, I am drained, I am done. That's the same type of thing with kids with sensory or autism. They're like, I have had to be with people all day, I'm drained, I'm done. But that's the real world. And so I think it's always that balance. But I think if you're dealing with families, whatever they need to get by, and it might be the question, I'm sure Mr. Wilson and his teammates have asked, do you have food? Do you know that you can come? These are where do you live? You don't have to come to our school to get it. This is the one that's closest to you to get it. And I have to say, that's where I think DC has knocked it out of the park in making sure that meals are available for students. I know they had some bumps in the road about saying, oh, you can't pick up so many, or you have to have the kids with you to pick them up. And, you know, they finally got smart and just kind of got rid of some of that. But, you know, that food, food instability, you know, was, I think, really scary for a lot of families right now. So I think that's the question. And then we can ease on to, I admire the schools that got, you know, virtual learning going in a week, but that wasn't going to be possible for a lot of places as well. I just think we have to realize, as we've talked about, this is going to keep happening. I mean, I think we're going to be going through another virtual, you know, homebound round again, even when this one's won over. So it's just a balance. I think we can, you know, take some small wins, and, like, you know, we have these kids that maybe aren't as anxious or able to access this, but it's not a true, let's be honest, what I'm doing here is not homeschooling. It's not a homeschooling model. I'm supporting a distance learning, you know, in the household, but it's not a true homeschool model. And I think that's the other thing, is people don't understand what homeschool really looks like as far as structure and the pieces and, you know, the elements. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of myth busting with this.
I just wanted to reiterate to just second what Molly said. I was talking about this with a colleague the other day, that just in general, that this is not homeschooling. This is not remote working. This is working from home and schooling from home in the midst of a pandemic. And those are very, very different things. And so, as Molly said, being gentle with our kids, but also being gentle with ourselves and being gentle. It's just, you know, I think the expectations of, like, this is going to be an 8-hour school day, or I'm going to work 8 hours, is, I'm sure you can all attest, is not realistic. That is not what is occurring right now. And there's some really great things about that, and there's some really not great things about that. And I think just, you know, actually, that when I was talking to Ashley a couple of weeks ago, she said, you know, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I think it goes to what Molly says, even if we have this moment of having some more interaction, I don't want to say back to normal, because I don't think we're getting back to normal. I think we're restarting a new approach when we get out of this. But you know, we might have to go back into where we are now. And so it is a marathon, and we just have to kind of, you know, be gentle with ourselves.
I also wanted to say, I feel like we haven't talked about school administrators much, and thinking a little bit about what Mr. Robinson was saying, and I know it's the same for teachers at our school. You know, people are getting calls at 9, 10, 11 at night, that there are some administrators at our school, they're like, you have to be available 8 to 4, period. Do it. And if you're not, you know, but I think there could be some flexibility if somebody knows they need to have a lesson or a Zoom meeting or a class. They've worked it out at 7 p.m. because you can't say to a bunch of kids, hey, we're going to do it at noon. A parent might say, but my other children are doing other things. And maybe then teachers have permission. So maybe your day doesn't start at 8. Maybe your day starts later because you're having a class or a lesson or office hours or some one-on-one time with a student at 7 p.m. So there's that flexibility, but that flexibility has to be supported by administrators, because otherwise teachers are just, teachers cannot continue to work from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. with the stress and dealing with their own situation and worrying about their own family's health. So I think administrative flexibility is going to be a huge part of this as we move ahead.
Right. And I want to add to that, because one of the things that Ivy Mount is doing, and I wish I could share some of them, but there's no way I can figure out how to do it, the Google. They're doing, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, I could spell it, but it's asynchronistic learning. So my son will go online and see on his Google Classroom, do this, do this, do this. And it's videos of the teacher showing him something and saying, hey, now I want you to open up this link and it'll take you to the Shark Conservatory, and then come back, and then he answers a Google survey form about what you learned or what you heard. So you could do teachers could do those kinds of lessons. And I don't think they're overly hard to do some of these taping, it's kind of thing. And then students can access that at night when their parents are off work and doing that. So that's the other thing that administrators and I think teachers need to know. It doesn't always have to be these live Zoom classrooms. Those are great, but those could be just little nuggets and you can join in. But these abilities to do these little modules of asynchronistic learning over go and watch the live, here's the link to the zoo's panda cage. You go on it, and then after 5 minutes, set your timer. This is another good thing for kids with time management. Set your timer on your phone for 5 minutes, come back, and then answer this survey that I've set up in the Google Classrooms or whatever you want to set it up, and say, what's your name? What time is it? What did you see in the picture? What did you like the best? Draw a picture and take a picture with your phone and up. That's how my daughter's art teacher is teaching. She's like, everybody draw the picture now. Now hold it up to the screen. Okay, take a picture, send it to me. Those pieces. So I think that's important to know too, that it doesn't all have to be this 9 to 5 live piece. And it also doesn't have to be a 50-minute class. Right? I mean, it could be.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Molly. We're already doing that, but I'm thinking of office hours or potential a little one-on-one tutoring, or like Mr. Robbins said, with kids on his caseload. I just think there needs to be flexibility and a lot of grace given to teachers with what they're going through right now. And again, what they're dealing with, and just not allowing them to be burned out. But yeah, no, I agree. We are using those programs and they're very successful, but sometimes there's still that needs to be that small group or one-on-one or advisory meeting or something. And maybe it has to happen at 7 p.m., but that means a teacher shouldn't have to start working at 8 a.m.
Right. Oh no, completely agree. Completely.
I just wanted to put a word into my administrator. In any case, I teach at Oyster Adams. And I have to say, I give kudos to my very young principal who has the wisdom 3 times her age. And she leads with such grace, and she's such a support to the entire faculty, and she understands the hardship that everybody's going through. As teachers started creating those asynchronous or those videos for asynchronous learning, I have to say they were overwhelmed. It will be easier with time as you get practice, but to learn how to create those videos and make yourself so present, vulnerable, and 100% present and fixed on the web forever, it takes a whole lot of sort of an emotional charge, if you will. So I find that our teachers, they are working slowly, but they are taking many hours to make one teeny tiny 15-minute video. So I just wanted to share that from my colleagues. And maybe even Lisa, Tracy, inviting some principals over here just to have a conversation with all of us might be a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I just shared a form in the chat about, you can sign up to be on our distribution list. We have new listservs. you guys would like to keep sharing resources after the meeting, I can make a listserv special to this group for distance learning for students with special needs, if that's of interest to you, so you can keep chatting. There are some questions. Yes, all of these, I can get the chat text and link it to our digest that is coming out today. But, you know, if you also just come across an issue that you wanted some feedback on, we can start that list now. And yeah, if you're interested. So. Well, I guess I can add it in the form, and then you can sign up on that link that I shared if you're interested.
I would also just kind of go back to, I think it was Karen or somebody said about school district sharing resources. I really like that national one, Educating All Learners, because I think you're going to see kind of from all, like the best of the best from all over. That is educatingalllearners.org. It's, I think I put it, it's probably way, we've been chatting so much, way at the top, but they are constantly adding resources and they're very teacher faced. So it's not, you know, policy people, different things. It's just very much teacher facing.
Thank you so much. I really, wow, I'm really blown away by this conversation. I feel like we have so many, we came out of this conversation with so many amazing resources. And I know on my end, I felt really overwhelmed trying to find these resources. I feel like there's an information overload on the internet, as we all know.
Fire hose time. That's what we've done to parents and teachers.
Oh yeah.
Straight towards you.
Yeah, but I really appreciate you all speaking up and sharing these resources, and definitely I will make sure that these go on our distance learning database for the DC Collaborative, which I can link here as well in case not all of you have it. But I think this will be really helpful for our community, and I'm really inspired by these conversations that we're having. And also, I just really appreciate that, you know, we're all keeping as much of a positive mindset as we can. I think it's really easy in this time to focus on the negative and how things are overwhelming or how we're anxious and how, you know, these times aren't ideal. But even just bringing up the fact that maybe for some students, distance learning is actually better for them. Maybe some parents are enjoying it. Maybe parents are being able to spend more time with their children. Bringing up the fact that DCPS has done a good job of getting these platforms running. I know in Northern Virginia, Blackboard has crashed entirely. I have friends that teach there and they're really struggling. So I really just appreciate where this conversation has gone, and just keeping in the back of our heads that even though we're all dealing with this pandemic, that there are a lot of really great things happening. And having these conversations is just so valuable. So I want to thank Molly, especially for joining us and sharing all your knowledge, Dayanne, Mr. Robinson, and all of you as well. Just want to be mindful of anyone's time, but if anyone had any other questions that they want to share or put in the chat, feel free to. But otherwise, we will have a listserv going. We can email out all these resources. We'll add them to the distance learning database, and hopefully we'll see you guys next Friday.
Thank you guys so very, very much. I have an IEP meeting to go to, but I really appreciate you guys, and please stay safe and healthy. Thank you, guys.
You too. Thank you guys so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.